Not long after my discovery of my then husband's second life, I started obsessively Googling different terms to try to understand who he was and how he could do these things. At the time, the label that I was mainly fixated on was sociopath, but I also dabbled a little bit in psychopath and a tad into narcissist, even though at that point that wasn't such a known label. And it was obsessive at the time, that drive to try to understand, to try to find that label. And in the beginning, it did help. It gave me some framework. It helped to depersonalize what was done to me. But then at some point, the label sort of outlived its usefulness, and I elected to discard it. So what I want to talk to you today about is a little bit about those labels that we use for people, whether it be our ex or just anybody in our lives. So as a teacher, I'm very familiar with labels. At the beginning of a school year, I get these long rosters of names. And at that point, the children are strangers to me. All I have is a name. But actually, I have a little bit more. There are certain students that have a little flag next to their name. And attached to that is a label, such as autistic or ADHD. And it's helpful for me as a teacher because in my years of experience, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of kids with those labels. And so what it does is before I ever meet that child, it gives me a little bit of framework for understanding. So that if the child is acting inappropriately or blurting out, I might have an understanding of why that behavior is happening. And I might even have some strategies that I can pull on to try to work with those behaviors and help that child be successful. So in the beginning, those labels are important because in the beginning, that's really all I have to go on. And it gives me sort of a head start. But then what happens is a few weeks into the school year, well, that label becomes meaningless because, little Johnny is so much more than just that label. And I learned to work with Johnny as an individual and to recognize his needs. And I don't need that shortcut of the label anymore. And ideally, I think that's how we can use labels. I see them as sort of cliff notes, as something that we should attach with, a sticky note. It's not something permanent. It's something that we use temporarily as sort of a shortcut for understanding. And then once we get to know the bigger picture, once we really start to understand that person, that label then, well, it loses its usefulness because people are so much more complex and complicated and multifaceted than a simple word. So as you're trying to figure out why certain people are the way they are, or how they can do the things that they do, it can be helpful to look into some of those labels. But don't become too fixated on them, because after all, we are all more than one simple word.